Okay, what would you do? Right off the bat, 2 people said no, wouldn't do it. 2 people said yes, I would do it. 2 people said, I'd ask questions like, why? That came across yesterday as arguing with God. Somebody said, I'd argue with him. Here's another, God asked me to do it, so I would. I'd hide my son. I'd obey God. Mostly I'd cry, then decide. Would not have done it. Don't think I could do it. I may have done nothing. See, we have read this story since Sunday school, and we've heard it so many times that we forget about the power of this story. I mean, obviously, put yourself in this man's shoes. God says, go kill your son, and you're like, are you nuts? I don't think so. How could you ask me to do something like that? What was going through Abraham's mind? Took his son Isaac, laid him on the altar on top of the wood, then he reached out his hand, took the knife to slay his son. You know, when I hear this story fresh, a couple questions come to my mind. The first one is, God, why would you do this? Why would you do this to somebody? That's mean, that's harsh. That's messed up. I'm just telling you how my mind works. And then my second question is, Abraham, why would you even consider obeying something like that? What were you thinking? Oh, Steve, that's not a very spiritual answer. Fine, I'm just telling you. Most people are not going to be doing something like this. And most people are going to be wondering what kind of God would want you to do something like that. I think it's an extremely harsh test. But I want to remind you of something. I've read to the end of the story. Nobody got hurt. It seemed like a really hard thing. Who was it? Roosevelt, who said there's nothing to fear but fear itself? Nobody got hurt. So yeah, it seems like a really hard test, but it was a test. It was a test. And why would God do something like this? I can't say for sure why, but I can tell you some of the things that have come out of it that are pretty good. The first thing I think about, and this one's pure speculation, so I'll give it to you first. You can do what you want with it. If you recall, last week, Abraham gave up his wife rather than fight for her. Wouldn't even admit it was his wife, just gave her to the king, Avimelech, because of fear. He had done that once before with the Pharaoh. So Abraham's life has been a series of great successes of faith and great failures of faith. Kind of like you and me. We've got our good days and our bad days. And I'm thinking Abraham might have been thinking pretty poorly of himself about this time. You know, what kind of God chose me to be the father of the Messiah's nation? I'm the one who's supposed to be the example of faith. I'm a mess up. God, you picked wrong. Maybe his heart was broken. Maybe he was feeling poorly about himself. How do you think he felt after he passed the test? You see what I'm saying? I can't say that there was a restorative element to this, but it seems like there might have been. Do you remember Peter? Jesus said, and he quoted the scripture, "It is written, strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. All of you will betray me tonight. You'll forsake me, every one of you." And Peter said, "Though everybody betray you, I will not." And Jesus looked at him and said, "Really? Before this night's up, you're going to deny me 3 times. Peter said, "No way. I would die first," was his heart's attitude. A few hours pass, some bad guys come, beat up on Jesus a little. Peter gets scared, takes him off to the high priest. All the others are gone. Peter's there. Then a little girl comes up to him, a maid, and says, "You were with Jesus, weren't you?" He said, "No, I don't know what you're talking about. Leave me alone." 3 times, and then the cock crowed, and he remembered what Jesus said. And he went out and he wept bitterly. He denied the Lord 3 times, just like the Lord said he would. How was Peter feeling at that time? He went out and he wept bitterly. And I can imagine what was going in his heart. I can't serve the Lord. I'm no good. Scripture says he went back to fishing. He gave up being an apostle. He quit. God, you're going to have to pick somebody better than me. I couldn't even stand up for you in front of a crowd. So he went back to fishing. Well, Jesus came down from heaven, baked up some breakfast, called out to Peter, who was fishing, said, come eat. And he said, Peter, do you love me? Peter said, yes, Lord, you know I love you. A minute later, he said, Peter, do you love me? Lord, you know I love you, and you know everything. Of course I love you. A second or two later, hey, Peter, do you love me? Lord, you're killing me. You know I love you. Then go feed my sheep. Get back to work. You denied me 3 times. You just said 3 times you love me. It's all good. Now go back to work. I wonder if Abraham had the same experience right here this day. I can't say for sure, but it makes sense to me. There were some good things that came out of this. Possibly the restoration of Abraham, though I can't say for sure. But I do know this for sure. Because of what Abraham did, he became an example of faithfulness to billions of people. To billions of people. So you love God. If God came up to you today and said, listen, I'm going to give you 4 of the most miserable days of your life, but it will bless billions of people. Would you let me do it? How many of you would say yes? Got some hands going up? I was afraid to ask you to put up your hands because, gee, I honestly don't know. Some of you are like, yeah, I'll do it for billions of people. You know I'll do it. I'll do it 8 days, 10, 12. Billions of people were blessed from his 4 days of terror. So some good came out of that test. Why did God do it? I don't know. But I know it blessed billions of people. Maybe that's enough of an answer itself. And yet there's another answer that's even better. My favorite. Abraham's experience was a huge illustration of the gospel to himself and to the generations to come. Listen to what God told Abraham. He said, take your son, the only son whom you love, Isaac, and sacrifice him. Abraham was willing to give up an only begotten son as a sacrifice. You know, God had a son once. Abraham was on the altar. Isaac was on the altar, and Abraham took his knife. In the scripture, especially in the King James, he stretched forth his hand to slay his son. Why that detail? I'm thinking to let us know exactly how close he got to actually doing the deed. He was ready. And then God called out to heaven and said, stop. Actually, it was the messenger of the Lord, the word of the Lord, the angel of the Lord called out to him and said, stop. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld your one and only son from me. Imagine his hand was on that knife and the angel of the Lord cried out and said, stop. He probably just went, oh. Who knows, he might have spent the last half hour weeping. Not to mention how Isaac must have felt. Imagine the therapy bill that man. I'm thinking, Isaac's not the hero of this story. Yes, he is. He's also the hero of this story. Even though he's not talked about, why didn't Isaac just deck his dad and run? Abraham was what, like 120 or something at this time? He couldn't even carry the wood for the altar. Isaac could have just decked his dad. He could have just walked away. I'm going to get you. Isaac offered himself willingly. So he had a father who was willing to offer him and a son willing to be offered. An only begotten son, loved of his father, to die for a sacrifice. But before he died, God said, stop. And so God has a son on his way to the cross, the nails getting ready to be pounded into his hand. Who yelled out, stop? Nobody. There was no stopping that day. What Abraham went through was bad, but not nearly as bad as what God's own son went through. And here's the most amazing part of the story to me. It says the messenger of the Lord called out to heaven and told him to stop. You know who the messenger of the Lord is? That's Jesus. Jesus was there that day. Jesus is the one who told Abraham to do this. Take your only son, whom you love, and offer him as a sacrifice, knowing full well he'd be the one on the cross. And nobody would ever say, stop.